The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete tarmac of Naval Base San Diego as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan. Her dress blues were immaculate, every ribbon and insignia precisely placed. But to the casual observer, she looked impossibly young for her rank. At 28, she had already made history multiple times over, though few people knew the full extent of her achievements. The driver, a junior enlisted sailor, struggled with her bags. "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want me to carry these to your quarters?" Sarah shook her head with a gentle smile. "I've got it from here, Petty Officer Martinez. Thank you for the ride." As she shouldered her duffel bag and picked up her briefcase, Sarah couldn't help but notice the curious stares from personnel walking by. She was used to it by now. Being one of the few women in her field meant she often stood out, and her youthful appearance only added to the attention. What they didn't know was that behind her calm exterior lay nerves of steel forged in the most dangerous places on Earth. This assignment was different from her previous deployments. Instead of leading covert operations in hostile territories, she was here to oversee a joint training exercise between Navy SEALs and Marine Force reconnaissance units. It was supposed to be a routine assignment, a chance to share her expertise in unconventional warfare and help prepare the next generation of special operations forces. The base was bustling with activity. Sailors and Marines moved with purpose across the compound, their conversations mixing with the distant sound of helicopters conducting training flights. Sarah made her way toward the main administrative building, where she was scheduled to check in with the base commander before meeting her assigned teams. As she walked, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she had never imagined she would one day be walking across a military base in California, wearing the uniform of a decorated naval officer. Her path had been anything but conventional, marked by determination, sacrifice, and a series of events that had tested her in ways she never could have anticipated. The administrative building loomed ahead, its stark military architecture a reminder of the serious business conducted within its walls. Sarah paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The cool air conditioning provided relief from the California heat and the familiar smell of military buildings, a mixture of cleaning supplies, coffee, and the subtle scent of documents brought back memories of countless bases she had visited over the years. The reception area was busy with personnel coming and going. Behind the main desk, a young petty officer was handling phone calls and directing visitors. Sarah approached the desk, setting down her briefcase and pulling out her orders. "Good morning," she said to the petty officer. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell reporting for duty. I have an appointment with Commander Harrison." The petty officer looked up from his computer screen, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her rank insignia. "Yes, ma'am. The commander is expecting you. Please have a seat, and I'll let him know you're here." Sarah found a chair in the waiting area and settled in, observing the flow of personnel around her. She could see through the large windows that faced the training areas, where groups of Marines were conducting physical fitness drills. The sight brought back memories of her own training days, when every muscle in her body ached and she wondered if she would make it through another day. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister back home. "Saw the news about the exercise on the military channel. Stay safe, and call Mom when you get a chance." Sarah smiled and quickly typed back, "Will do. Everything's fine here. Just another day at the office." If only her family knew what her office had looked like over the past few years. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the deserts of Iraq, from classified facilities in undisclosed locations to training camps in allied nations, her work had taken her to places most people only saw in movies. But that was behind her now, at least for the duration of this assignment. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell?" The petty officer called her name. "Commander Harrison will see you now. His office is down the hall, second door on the right." Sarah stood, gathered her belongings, and made her way down the corridor. The walls were lined with photographs of previous base commanders and notable events in the base's history. She paused briefly at a photo showing a group of female naval officers from the early days of women's integration into combat roles, wondering what challenges they had faced and how their experiences compared to her own. Commander Harrison's office door was open and she could see him sitting behind his desk, reviewing documents. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades in service. Sarah knocked on the doorframe. "Come in, Lieutenant Commander," he said, looking up with a welcoming smile. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation precedes you." Sarah entered the office and came to attention. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here and ready to contribute to the exercise." Commander Harrison gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Please, sit down. Coffee?" "That would be great, sir." As he poured 2 cups from a coffee maker on a side table, Commander Harrison continued talking. "I've read your file and I have to say it's impressive. Your work with joint operations has been exemplary, and the feedback from your previous commanders has been outstanding." Sarah accepted the coffee cup gratefully. "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to working with the teams here. From what I understand, we have some excellent personnel participating in this exercise." "We do indeed." The commander nodded. "Some of the best SEALs and Marines in the Navy and Corps. They're eager to learn from someone with your experience in asymmetric warfare and cross-cultural operations." The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering the details of the exercise, her accommodation arrangements, and the schedule for the coming weeks. As they talked, Sarah felt her confidence growing. This was familiar territory for her, discussing tactics, strategy, and training methodologies with fellow officers who understood the complexities of modern military operations. After her meeting with Commander Harrison, Sarah made her way to the temporary quarters assigned to her for the duration of the exercise. The building was typical military housing, functional, clean, and devoid of personality. Her room was small but adequate, with a single bed, a desk, and a narrow closet. She unpacked efficiently, hanging her uniforms with military precision and organizing her personal items in the small dresser. As she arranged her belongings, Sarah's mind wandered to the upcoming training sessions. She had spent weeks preparing for this assignment, reviewing the latest intelligence reports and tactical developments in special operations. The exercise was designed to test interoperability between different branches of the military, something that had become increasingly important in modern warfare. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email from the exercise coordinator. The message contained her schedule for the next day, which would begin with a briefing to the participating teams. Sarah read through the details carefully, noting the names and backgrounds of the key personnel she would be working with. Most were experienced operators with multiple deployments, the kind of professionals who had earned their reputations through years of hard work and dangerous missions. The afternoon was hers to explore the base and familiarize herself with the training facilities. Sarah changed into her working uniform and set out to get a feel for her new environment. The base was larger than she had initially realized, with multiple training areas, firing ranges, and specialized facilities for different types of operations. She stopped by the armory to inspect the weapons and equipment that would be used during the exercise. The Master Chief in charge was a grizzled veteran with arms covered in tattoos, each one telling a story of deployments and battles fought in distant lands. He showed her around with professional courtesy, explaining the various systems and modifications that had been made to the standard equipment. "We've got some new gear we're testing out during this exercise," he explained, pointing to a rack of modified rifles. "Night vision capabilities have been enhanced, and we've got some new communication systems that should improve coordination between teams." Sarah examined the equipment with a practiced eye. "This looks impressive. How are the operators adapting to the new systems?" "Pretty well, ma'am. There's always a learning curve with new tech, but these guys are professionals. They figure it out fast." From the armory, Sarah walked to the physical training areas where she could see teams of SEALs and Marines working through various exercises. The intensity of their training was evident in every movement. These were not ordinary military personnel, but elite operators who pushed themselves to the limits of human endurance and capability. She paused to watch a group of SEALs conducting a close-quarters combat drill. Their movements were fluid and precise, each team member knowing instinctively where his teammates would be and what they would do next. It was like watching a carefully choreographed dance, except that in real combat, mistakes could mean the difference between life and death. One of the instructors noticed her watching and approached. He was a senior chief petty officer with the weathered look of someone who had seen extensive combat. "Afternoon, ma'am. You must be the new instructor we heard about." "That's right," Sarah replied. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. I'll be working with your teams on joint operations procedures." The senior chief extended his hand. "Senior Chief Rodriguez, welcome to our little corner of paradise. The men are looking forward to working with you." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way he looked her directly in the eyes. She could see him sizing her up, trying to determine what kind of officer she was and whether she would earn the respect of his men. It was a familiar process, one she had gone through many times before. "I'm looking forward to it as well," she said. "From what I've seen so far, you have an impressive group of operators here." Senior Chief Rodriguez nodded. "They're good men. They work hard and they take their responsibilities seriously. They just want to make sure that anyone teaching them knows what they're talking about." The message was clear, though delivered with professional courtesy. These elite operators had little patience for theoretical knowledge or classroom warriors. They wanted to learn from someone who had been there, done that, and lived to tell about it. Sarah understood completely. "I wouldn't expect anything less," she replied. "Mutual respect has to be earned, and I look forward to the opportunity." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah continued her exploration of the base. She visited the medical facilities, where she met the corpsmen who would be supporting the exercise. She checked out the communications center, where sophisticated equipment allowed for coordination with units around the world. She even stopped by the base exchange to pick up a few personal items and grab a quick snack. Everywhere she went, she was greeted with professional courtesy, but she could also sense the curiosity about her. Word traveled fast on military bases, and by now most people knew that a female lieutenant commander had arrived to work with the special operations teams. Some looked at her with obvious skepticism, wondering how someone who looked so young could have achieved such a high rank. Others seemed more accepting, perhaps having worked with female officers in combat roles before. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the officers' club for dinner. The club was a modest affair, with a dining room that served basic but well-prepared meals and a bar area where off-duty personnel could relax and socialize. The atmosphere was casual but respectful, with conversations ranging from military topics to sports and current events. Sarah ordered a simple meal and found a quiet table where she could review her notes for the next day's briefing. As she ate, she listened to the conversations around her, picking up on the base's informal culture and getting a sense of the personalities she would be working with. At a nearby table, a group of Marine officers were discussing recent changes in tactics and equipment. Their conversation was animated but professional, with each officer contributing insights based on their own experiences. Sarah found herself impressed by the depth of their knowledge and their obvious commitment to their profession. The evening passed quietly, with Sarah returning to her quarters early to get a good night's rest before the challenging days ahead. As she prepared for bed, she reflected on her first day at the base. The facilities were excellent, the personnel were professional, and everything seemed to be in place for a successful exercise. But she also knew that the real test would come when she stood in front of the assembled teams and had to prove that she belonged there. Tomorrow would be the beginning of that process, and she was ready for whatever challenges it might bring. The briefing room was already filled with the low murmur of conversation when Sarah arrived the next morning. 48 elite operators sat in neat rows, their uniforms crisp and their attention focused. The mix of Navy SEALs and Marine Force reconnaissance personnel represented some of the most highly trained military professionals in the world, and Sarah could feel the weight of their collective experience as she walked to the front of the room. She had chosen her uniform carefully, working fatigues rather than dress blues, practical rather than formal. On her chest, her ribbons told a story that few in the room would immediately recognize, but the combat action ribbon and several classified operation ribbons were visible to those who knew what to look for. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, and I'll be working with you over the next 3 weeks on joint operations procedures and cross-cultural intelligence applications." The room fell silent, and Sarah could see the operators studying her intently. She had given this type of briefing many times before, but each audience was different, and she knew that earning credibility with special operations personnel required more than just rank and credentials. "Before we begin," she continued, I want to address something that I'm sure some of you are thinking. You're looking at me and wondering what a naval officer who looks like she just graduated from college is going to teach you about operations that you've been conducting for years. Few subtle smiles appeared around the room, and Sarah could sense a slight relaxation in the atmosphere. By acknowledging the elephant in the room directly, she had demonstrated that she understood their perspective. "That's a fair question," she said, "and one that I would ask if I were in your position, so let me tell you why I'm here." Sarah clicked a remote, and the large screen behind her displayed a map of the Middle East with several locations highlighted. "Over the past 6 years, I've planned and executed 17 classified operations in support of special operations teams. I've worked with SEALs, Rangers, Delta Force, and Marine Recon units in environments ranging from urban combat zones to remote mountain regions." The room's attention was now completely focused on her. She clicked again, and the screen showed a different map, this one of Southeast Asia. "I spent 2 years embedded with local forces in the Philippines, training them in counter-terrorism operations and conducting joint missions against Abu Sayyaf cells. Before that, I was part of a classified program in Afghanistan that I can't discuss in detail, but which involved deep penetration missions behind enemy lines." Another click brought up a photo of Sarah in combat gear, standing with a group of bearded special operations personnel in what was clearly a hostile environment. Her face was younger, but her eyes held the same steady confidence that she projected now. The men around her were clearly treating her as an equal, not as a liability or a political statement. "This photo was taken 18 months ago in a location I can't name," Sarah said. "The mission was successful and all personnel returned safely. The point is not to brag about my experiences, but to establish that I've earned my place in this room through the same process that all of you have, by proving myself in the field, under pressure, when lives were on the line." Petty Officer First Class Jake Stevens, a SEAL with multiple deployments and a reputation as one of the most skilled operators in his unit, raised his hand. "Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but those operations you mentioned, what was your role? Were you in a command position, or were you providing intelligence support?" It was exactly the question Sarah had been expecting, and she appreciated the direct approach. "Direct question deserves a direct answer, Petty Officer Stevens. In 14 of those 17 operations, I was the mission commander. In the other 3, I was second in command. In every case, I was armed and participated directly in combat operations when necessary." She paused to let that information sink in before continuing. "I know this is unusual. The military is still adapting to having women in direct combat roles, and special operations has been slower to change than other areas. But the nature of modern warfare, particularly in environments where cultural understanding is crucial, sometimes requires operators who can interact effectively with local populations in ways that traditional teams cannot." Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a Marine Force Recon veteran, spoke up. "Ma'am, can you give us a specific example of how that cultural understanding made a difference in an operation?" Sarah nodded. "Absolutely. 2 years ago, we were tasked with capturing a high-value target in a compound in an undisclosed location. The target had wives and daughters who were always present in the house. Previous attempts by all-male teams had failed because the women would create diversions, hide intelligence materials, or help the target escape through passages that the teams couldn't search thoroughly due to cultural restrictions." She clicked to another slide showing a tactical diagram. "My team included 3 other female operators, and we were able to secure the women and children safely while the male team members focused on the target. We recovered critical intelligence that had been missed in previous raids because we could search areas and question individuals that had been off-limits before." The room was completely quiet now, and Sarah could see that she had the full attention of every operator present. These were professional warriors who understood the complexities of modern combat, and they could appreciate tactical innovations that produced results. "The target was captured alive," Sarah continued, "and the intelligence we recovered led to the disruption of a major terrorist network. The mission succeeded because we adapted our approach to the cultural and tactical realities of the environment." Chief Petty Officer David Kim, another SEAL with an impressive service record, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's your assessment of how we can improve our current joint operations procedures?" "That's what we're here to figure out together," Sarah replied. "I've reviewed the after-action reports from your recent exercises, and you're already performing at an extremely high level. But there are always opportunities for improvement, particularly in the areas of inter-service communication and coordination with local forces. She clicked to a new slide showing communication protocols. One area where I've seen consistent challenges is in the handoff between different units during complex operations. SEALs and Marines train differently, use different terminology for some procedures, and have different standard operating procedures for certain situations. These differences can create confusion during critical moments. Senior Chief Rodriguez, whom Sarah had met the day before, nodded thoughtfully. We've definitely seen that in previous exercises. Sometimes what seems obvious to us isn't obvious to the Marines and vice versa. Exactly, Sarah said. And that's not a criticism of either service. You've both developed procedures that work extremely well for your specific missions and capabilities. The challenge is creating seamless integration when you work together. Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Parker, one of only 3 women in the room and a Marine with extensive combat experience, asked, "Ma'am, how do we maintain our individual unit capabilities while still improving joint operations?" "That's the key question," Sarah replied. "We're not here to change what makes each of your units effective. We're here to build bridges between those capabilities so that the combined force is more effective than the sum of its parts." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, with operators from both services asking detailed questions about tactics, procedures, and lessons learned from real-world operations. Sarah answered each question directly and thoroughly, drawing on her extensive experience to provide practical, actionable insights. The first practical training session took place that afternoon at the base's urban warfare training facility. The mock-town was an impressive setup, complete with buildings, vehicles, and even mannequins dressed as civilians. It was designed to replicate the complex environment that special operations teams encountered in real-world missions, where distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants could mean the difference between mission success and international incident. Sarah had divided the 48 operators into mixed teams, combining SEALs and Marines in groups of 8. The exercise was designed to test their ability to work together while clearing a series of buildings that supposedly contained hostile forces and valuable intelligence. What the teams didn't know was that Sarah had added several complications to the scenario that would test not just their tactical skills, but their ability to adapt to unexpected situations. Team Alpha, led by Chief Petty Officer Kim and including Petty Officer Stevens among others, approached their assigned building with textbook precision. They had spent the morning reviewing the plan, assigning roles, and rehearsing their procedures. As they moved into position, their movements were fluid and professional, each operator knowing exactly where he needed to be and what his responsibilities were. Sarah watched from the observation tower, speaking quietly into her radio to the role players positioned throughout the training area. "Control to Actor 7. Initiate civilian scenario in Building 2, over." Inside the building, Team Alpha was making good progress when they encountered their first surprise. As they entered what they expected to be an empty room, they found a woman in civilian clothes holding a small child. The role player began speaking rapidly in Arabic, gesturing frantically and apparently pleading for help. Stevens immediately moved to cover the corners while Kim tried to calm the woman. But none of the team members spoke Arabic, and the situation quickly became complicated. The woman continued speaking urgently, pointing toward another room and seeming to indicate that there was danger. "This is where cultural understanding becomes critical," Sarah spoke into her radio to the exercise evaluators. "The team has the tactical skills to secure the area, but they're missing important information because they can't communicate effectively with the civilian." From her position, Sarah could see Team Bravo approaching the same building from a different direction. This team was led by Gunnery Sergeant Parker and included several Marines who had experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. As they encountered their own civilian role player, an elderly man who appeared to be injured, their response was noticeably different. Staff Sergeant Torres, who had learned basic Arabic during his deployments, was able to communicate with the man and quickly determined that he was trying to warn them about an improvised explosive device in the next room. The team was able to adjust their approach and avoid the simulated danger. Interesting contrast, Sarah noted to herself as she watched both teams continue through their objectives. Team Alpha's superior technical skills were being hampered by their inability to gather human intelligence, while Team Bravo's cultural preparation was allowing them to navigate the complex environment more effectively. As the exercise continued, Both teams encountered additional challenges. Role players dressed as enemy combatants appeared at unexpected moments, requiring split-second decisions about rules of engagement. Hidden cameras and listening devices had to be located and secured, and throughout it all, the teams had to maintain communication with each other and coordinate their movements to avoid interfering with each other's operations. Sarah moved to different observation points throughout the facility, taking notes and speaking with the exercise evaluators about what they were observing. The performance of both teams was impressive, but she could see areas where improved joint procedures could make them even more effective. "Control to all teams," she announced over the radio as the exercise neared its conclusion. "Be advised that you have 15 minutes to complete your objectives and extract to the designated rally point." The time pressure added a new dynamic to the exercise. Team Alpha, still struggling with the language barrier, had to make decisions based on incomplete information. Team Bravo, having gathered more intelligence from the civilian role players, was able to move more efficiently toward their objectives. But as both teams converged on the final building, they encountered a scenario that Sarah had specifically designed to test their joint operations capabilities. The building contained multiple hostile role players, several civilians, and time-sensitive intelligence that had to be secured before it could be destroyed. Neither team had sufficient personnel to handle all aspects of the mission simultaneously. Success would require them to coordinate their efforts, share information, and adapt their individual procedures to work as a combined force. Chief Kim and Gunnery Sergeant Parker quickly established communication and began coordinating their approach. The SEALs would handle the technical aspects of securing the intelligence materials, while the Marines would focus on controlling the civilian population and neutralizing the hostile role players. Sarah watched with satisfaction as the two teams worked together to execute a complex operation. There were still rough edges, moments when communication broke down or procedures conflicted, but the overall performance was impressive. Both teams demonstrated their ability to adapt and learn in real time. As the exercise concluded and the teams gathered for immediate after-action review, Sarah could see the mutual respect that was developing between the SEALs and Marines. They had tested each other's capabilities and found them worthy of professional admiration. "Outstanding work, everyone," Sarah announced to the assembled operators. "I saw some excellent individual and team performance out there, and more importantly, I saw the beginning of effective joint operations. But I also saw several areas where we can improve, and that's what we'll focus on in our debrief." Chief Kim raised his hand. "Ma'am, that language barrier issue really slowed us down. In a real operation, that could have been critical." "Exactly right," Sarah replied. "And that's not a failure on your part. It's a systems issue that we need to address. How do we ensure that teams have the cultural and linguistic capabilities they need for their specific mission areas?" Gunnery Sergeant Parker added. "The coordination between our teams got better as the exercise went on, but those first few minutes were rough. We were practically stepping on each other." "Also a valid observation," Sarah said. "Joint operations require not just individual excellence, but collective excellence. That comes from training together, understanding each other's capabilities and limitations, and developing shared procedures that work for everyone." The discussion continued as the teams moved indoors for a more detailed debrief. Sarah used video footage from the exercise to highlight specific moments where things went well and where improvements could be made. The operators asked thoughtful questions and offered suggestions based on their own experiences from real-world missions. As the session ended, Petty Officer Stevens approached Sarah privately. "Ma'am, I have to admit, when I first saw you this morning, I wasn't sure what to expect. But watching you run that exercise and seeing how you set up those scenarios, that was professional-level training design." Sarah appreciated the honest feedback. "Thank you, Petty Officer Stevens. I know it takes time to build trust in this community, and I respect that. My goal is to earn that trust through performance, not just rank or credentials." Senior Chief Rodriguez, who had been observing the exercise as well, joined the conversation. "Ma'am, the men are already talking about how realistic those scenarios were. You've obviously put a lot of thought into making this training relevant to what we actually encounter in the field." "That's the goal," Sarah replied. "Training has to be challenging and realistic, or it doesn't prepare you for the real thing. Tomorrow we'll build on what we learned today and add some additional complexities." By the end of the first week, Sarah had established a routine that kept her constantly engaged with the training teams. Her days began before dawn with physical training alongside the operators, demonstrating that she could meet the same fitness standards expected of everyone else. Her mornings were spent in classroom sessions covering advanced tactics and cultural awareness, while her afternoons involved practical exercises that grew progressively more complex. The operators had begun to accept her as more than just another instructor. During the evening meals at the base dining facility, she often found herself invited to sit with different groups, engaging in the informal conversations that were just as important as the formal training for building unit cohesion. On this particular evening, she was sitting with a mixed group of SEALs and Marines when the conversation turned to some of the more challenging deployments they had experienced. The stories were told with the understated humor that combat veterans used to process difficult experiences. But Sarah could hear the underlying respect for the dangers they had faced and the teammates who had stood beside them. "Ma'am?" asked Corporal Jason Wright, a young Marine who had recently completed his first deployment. "What was the scariest mission you ever went on?" The table fell quiet, and Sarah could see that everyone was interested in her answer. It was the kind of question that could either build credibility or destroy it, depending on how honestly and appropriately she responded. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. 2 years ago, we had intelligence that a high-value target was meeting with weapons suppliers in a compound about 30 miles outside of a major city. The problem was that the compound was in the middle of a refugee camp, with about 2,000 displaced civilians. She paused to take a sip of coffee before continuing. The target was planning a major attack that would have killed hundreds of innocent people, so we couldn't wait for a better opportunity. But conducting an operation in the middle of a refugee camp meant that any mistake could result in civilian casualties and create an international incident. Staff Sergeant Torres leaned forward. "How did you handle the civilian population?" "Very carefully," Sarah replied. "We spent 3 days studying the camp layout and the daily routines of the residents. We identified the times when there would be the fewest people near the target compound, and we planned multiple extraction routes that would minimize our exposure to civilian areas." Chief Kim asked, "What made it scary?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "The thing that kept me awake at night wasn't the tactical challenges. We had good intelligence, experienced operators, and solid contingency plans. What scared me was the responsibility. If something went wrong, if we made a mistake, innocent people would die, children would die, and that would be on me as the mission commander." The table was completely quiet now. Every person there understood the weight of that responsibility, but few had carried it at Sarah's level. "How did the mission go?" asked Petty Officer Stevens. "We got our target," Sarah said simply. "Clean extraction, no civilian casualties, intelligence material secured. But I'll never forget walking through that camp beforehand, seeing the families who were just trying to survive, knowing that their safety depended on our professionalism and precision." Gunnery Sergeant Parker nodded slowly. "That's the part they don't show in the movies. The weight of knowing that everything depends on you making the right call." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "The technical skills, the physical training, the equipment, all of that is important. But what really matters is the judgment to know when to take the shot and when to hold back, when to push forward and when to wait for a better opportunity." The conversation continued for another hour, with operators sharing their own experiences and discussing the complexities of modern warfare. Sarah was struck by the maturity and thoughtfulness of these professional warriors, who understood better than anyone the human cost of the missions they were asked to undertake. Later that evening, Sarah was walking back to her quarters when she encountered a group of operators conducting night training exercises. They were practicing close-quarters combat techniques under limited visibility conditions, using night vision equipment to navigate through a darkened obstacle course. She stopped to observe, noting the precision and coordination that the teams maintained even in challenging conditions. The training was intense and realistic, with instructors constantly introducing new variables to test the operator's ability to adapt under pressure. Senior Chief Rodriguez noticed her watching and approached. "Evening, ma'am. Just running some night ops training with the new guys. How are they performing?" Sarah asked. "Pretty well, considering most of them haven't worked together before this exercise. The mixed teams are definitely improving their coordination." Sarah watched as Team Bravo worked through a particularly complex scenario involving multiple rooms, hidden obstacles, and time pressure. Their movements were becoming more fluid, and she could see that the SEALs and Marines were beginning to anticipate each other's actions. "Senior Chief," she said, "I'd like to add something to tomorrow's training schedule. I want to run a scenario that will test their ability to handle a rapidly changing situation where their original plan becomes irrelevant." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "Something I encountered in Afghanistan," Sarah replied. "A mission where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and success depended entirely on the team's ability to improvise and adapt in real time." "Sounds challenging. The men will appreciate that." As they spoke, one of the teams was completing their exercise and gathering for a quick after-action review. Sarah could hear the constructive criticism and suggestions being shared between team members, with SEALs and Marines offering insights to help each other improve. "They're really starting to gel as joint units," Rodriguez observed. "That usually takes longer to develop," Sarah nodded. "They're all professionals. Once they understood what we were trying to accomplish and saw that the training was relevant to their real-world missions, they committed fully to the process." The next morning brought news that would add urgency to their training. Commander Harrison called Sarah to his office before the scheduled training session began. "We've received word that the exercise timeline may be accelerated," he informed her. "There's a possibility that some of these operators may be deployed sooner than originally planned." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her stomach. "What's the situation, sir?" "I can't go into details, but there's been a development in one of our operational areas that may require a rapid response. These teams might be called upon to execute real-world missions using the joint procedures you've been developing." The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. Training exercises were important, but the possibility that lives might depend on how well she had prepared these operators made everything feel more urgent. "Understood, sir. We'll adjust our training schedule to accelerate the most critical elements." "How confident are you in their current capabilities?" Commander Harrison asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "They're excellent individual operators and they're making good progress on joint procedures, but they haven't been tested under the kind of pressure they would face in a real-world crisis situation." "Then I suggest you find a way to test them," the commander said, "because if they get called up, they won't have the luxury of a learning curve." As Sarah left the commander's office, she was already planning modifications to the day's training schedule. The scenario she had discussed with Senior Chief Rodriguez the night before would be moved up, and she would add additional stress factors to push the teams to their limits. The stakes had just gotten higher, and everyone would need to be ready. The advanced training scenario that Sarah implemented that afternoon was unlike anything the operators had experienced during the exercise. She had designed it based on a real mission that had gone wrong in Afghanistan, where a simple intelligence gathering operation had rapidly escalated into a complex combat situation, requiring split-second decisions and perfect coordination between multiple units. The scenario began routinely enough. The combined teams were tasked with investigating reports of weapons smuggling in a simulated village. Intelligence suggested that the activity was limited to a small group of local criminals, and the mission was expected to be straightforward surveillance and evidence gathering. But as the teams moved into position, Sarah began introducing complications through the exercise controllers. A role player approached one of the observation posts, claiming to be a local police officer with urgent information. Another role player, dressed as a civilian, began acting suspiciously near one of the target buildings, potentially compromising the team's concealment. Chief Kim's team was positioned on the north side of the village when they received an urgent radio call from Team Bravo. Contact. We have armed individuals moving toward Building 3. Request immediate support." The communication crackled with tension as Gunnery Sergeant Parker's voice came over the radio. "Multiple hostiles, unknown number. They appear to be armed with automatic weapons and are moving with military precision. This is not the criminal smuggling operation we were briefed on." Sarah watched from the command post as both teams adapted to the rapidly changing situation. The scenario was designed to test their ability to transition from a surveillance mission to a direct action mission while maintaining coordination and preventing civilian casualties. "All teams, this is Control," Sarah announced over the radio. "Be advised that rules of engagement remain in effect. Positive identification required before engaging any targets. Civilian safety is priority 1." The exercise controllers continued to introduce new complications. Role players dressed as journalists appeared with cameras, simulating the kind of media presence that could complicate real-world operations. A role player acting as a local government official demanded to know what the teams were doing in his village. Team Alpha found themselves pinned down by simulated hostile fire while trying to reach an observation position that would allow them to support Team Bravo. The narrow streets of the mock village made movement difficult, and the teams had to use urban warfare techniques to advance while maintaining communication. "This is Alpha 6, Chief Kim reported. "We're taking heavy fire from Building 5. Request permission to engage with grenades." It was exactly the kind of decision that Sarah wanted to test. In the artificial environment of the training scenario, the use of grenades would be simulated with smoke markers. But in a real village, such weapons could cause collateral damage and civilian casualties. "Alpha 6, what is your assessment of civilian presence in the target area?" Sarah responded. There was a pause as Kim consulted with his team members. "Control, we have eyes on the building. No civilian movement visible, but we cannot confirm the building is clear." "Alpha 6, you are cleared to use minimum necessary force. Exercise extreme caution regarding civilian safety." The decision-making process continued throughout the exercise as both teams encountered situations that required them to balance mission objectives with rules of engagement and safety considerations. The SEALs and Marines had to coordinate their movements through radio communication while dealing with the stress of simulated combat and the complexity of urban terrain. Staff Sergeant Torres distinguished himself during one particularly challenging moment when his team encountered a role player acting as a wounded civilian. The civilian was positioned in an area that the team needed to cross to reach their objective, but helping him would expose them to hostile fire and delay their mission. Torres made the decision to split his team, leaving 2 operators to provide medical assistance while the rest continued toward their objective. It was a choice that demonstrated both tactical awareness and adherence to the ethical principles that governed military operations. As the exercise reached its climax, both teams had to coordinate a simultaneous assault on 2 buildings while extracting the wounded role player and securing evidence materials. The complexity of the operation required constant communication and precise timing. "Bravo 6, this is Alpha 6, Chief Kim called over the radio. "We are in position for coordinated breach. Are you ready?" "Alpha 6, Bravo 6. Ready for breach on your command." "All teams, breach in 3, 2, 1, execute." Sarah watched as both teams moved with practiced precision, their movements coordinated despite the stress and complexity of the scenario. The weeks of training had paid off, with SEALs and Marines working together as if they had been operating as joint units for years. The exercise concluded with both teams successfully completing their modified objectives, but Sarah's evaluation would focus on the decision-making process as much as the tactical execution. During the after-action review, she led a detailed discussion of each major decision point and the factors that influenced the team's choices. "Outstanding performance under pressure," Sarah began as the teams gathered in the briefing room. "You adapted to a rapidly changing situation while maintaining your core priorities and values. But let's examine some of the key decision points and see how we might improve our processes." She used video footage and radio transcripts to walk through specific moments in the exercise, asking team members to explain their reasoning and consider alternative approaches. The discussion was detailed and professional, with operators offering honest assessments of their own performance and constructive suggestions for improvement. Petty Officer Stevens raised his hand during the discussion. "Ma'am, in that situation where we had to decide about the grenades, what would have been the right call in a real-world scenario?" Sarah appreciated the direct question. "That depends on a lot of factors that we can simulate but not perfectly replicate. Intelligence about civilian presence, the specific threat level, available alternatives, time pressure. All of these would influence the decision. The important thing is that you went through a proper decision-making process under pressure." Corporal Wright asked a follow-up question. "How do we balance mission success with civilian safety when those priorities might conflict?" "That's one of the most difficult aspects of modern warfare," Sarah replied. "The legal and ethical framework is clear. Civilian safety takes priority. But the practical application of that principle in complex situations requires judgment that can only be developed through training and experience. Gunnery Sergeant Parker added her perspective. What I noticed during the exercise was that having SEALs and Marines working together actually gave us more options. When one team was pinned down, the other could provide support. When we needed different capabilities, we could task the team that was best equipped for that specific challenge. Exactly right, Sarah confirmed. Joint operations aren't just about doing the same things together. They're about leveraging the unique capabilities of different units to create more effective and more flexible response options. The debriefing session continued for over 2 hours, with detailed analysis of communication procedures, decision-making processes, and tactical coordination. By the end of the session, Sarah was confident that the teams had internalized the key lessons and would be able to apply them in real-world situations. As the operators filed out of the briefing room, Senior Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen training scenarios that realistic. How did you develop those situations?" Sarah's expression grew more serious. "Because I lived through the real version, Senior Chief. Everything that happened in today's exercise actually happened to my team in Afghanistan. The only difference was that in the real mission, the consequences were permanent." Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "Did everyone make it home?" "Everyone made it home," Sarah confirmed. "But only because we made the right decisions under pressure. That's why this training matters so much. When the real thing happens, there's no time to figure it out. You have to rely on your training, your teammates, and your judgment." That evening, as Sarah reviewed her notes from the day's exercise, she received a secure phone call from Commander Harrison. The news was what she had been expecting but had hoped to avoid. "Lieutenant Commander, we've received deployment orders for 2 of the teams. They'll be leaving in 72 hours for a classified operation. Are they ready?" Sarah looked at her training assessments and thought about the performance she had observed over the past 2 weeks. The teams had made remarkable progress, but 72 hours was not much time to address the remaining areas for improvement. "They're as ready as we can make them in the time available, sir. I'd like to run one final exercise tomorrow to reinforce the key procedures, and then spend the remaining time on mission-specific preparation." "Do it," the commander replied. "Lives may depend on how well you've prepared them." The final day of training arrived with an intensity that everyone could feel. Word of the impending deployment had spread throughout the teams, though the specific details remained classified. Sarah had designed one last exercise that would test everything the operators had learned, but she knew that this session was different from all the others. This time, the skills they demonstrated might be used in actual combat within days. She stood in front of the assembled teams that morning, looking at faces that had become familiar over the past 3 weeks. These men and women had transformed from skeptical strangers into a cohesive joint unit, and she felt a deep sense of responsibility for their preparation. "Today's exercise will be comprehensive," she announced. "You'll face multiple challenges simultaneously, including hostage rescue, intelligence gathering, and direct action components. Most importantly, you'll have to make decisions with incomplete information while maintaining coordination between teams operating in different locations." The scenario Sarah had designed was based on a real-world situation that special operations forces might encounter in numerous global hotspots. A group of humanitarian workers had been taken hostage by an unknown organization, and initial intelligence suggested they were being held in a compound that also contained valuable intelligence materials about terrorist networks. The teams would have to infiltrate the compound, rescue the hostages, secure the intelligence materials, and extract safely, all while avoiding civilian casualties and maintaining operational security. The exercise would test every skill they had developed during their training. As the teams moved into position, Sarah found herself thinking about the young faces she had seen that first day and how they had matured over the course of the training. Chief Kim had evolved from a skeptical operator into a confident joint operations leader. Gunnery Sergeant Parker had become a bridge between the services, helping to translate procedures and build understanding. Even Corporal Wright, the youngest member of the teams, had grown into a reliable operator who could be counted on under pressure. The exercise began with a simulated helicopter insertion at dawn. The teams had to navigate through hostile territory to reach their objective, using stealth and careful coordination to avoid detection by role players acting as enemy patrols. The complexity of the scenario required constant communication and split-second decision-making. Alpha Team is in position, Chief Kim reported over the radio. We have eyes on the compound. Count 6 hostile role players visible, unknown number inside buildings. Bravo Team is approaching from the south, Gunnery Sergeant Parker responded. We can see what appears to be civilian activity in the adjacent building. Recommend extreme caution with any explosive ordnance. Sarah monitored the team's progress from the command post, noting how naturally they had adopted joint procedures and terminology. The SEALs and Marines were communicating as if they had been working together for years, not weeks. The first major challenge came when Team Alpha discovered that the compound layout was different from their intelligence briefing. The building where the hostages were supposedly held was larger than expected, with multiple rooms and potential hiding places. The team had to adapt their plan in real time while maintaining coordination with Team Bravo, which was approaching from a different direction. Control, this is Alpha 6, Chief Kim reported. The target building has more rooms than briefed. We need additional time to clear the structure safely. Alpha 6, time is a critical factor, Sarah responded, introducing the kind of pressure that real-world operations often involved. You have hostages who may be in immediate danger, and your window for extraction is limited. The decision-making process that followed demonstrated everything that Sarah had hoped to achieve with the training program. Chief Kim quickly conferred with his team and then coordinated with Team Bravo to develop a modified plan that would allow them to clear the building efficiently while maintaining safety protocols. Bravo 6, this is Alpha 6. We need you to secure the perimeter and prevent any hostile escape while we conduct the hostage rescue. Can you also establish overwatch positions to support our extraction? Alpha 6, Bravo 6, understood. Moving to overwatch positions now. The coordination between the teams was seamless, with each unit leveraging its specific capabilities to support the overall mission. The SEALs focused on the technical aspects of the hostage rescue, while the Marines provided security and fire support. As the exercise progressed, Sarah introduced additional complications through the exercise controllers. Role players acting as local police arrived on the scene, demanding to know what was happening. A role player dressed as a journalist appeared with a camera, simulating the media attention that often complicated real-world operations. The teams handled each challenge professionally, with designated personnel managing the civilian interactions while the rest of the unit continued with their primary mission. The procedures they had developed during training allowed them to address multiple issues simultaneously without losing focus on their objectives. The climax of the exercise came when Team Alpha breached the building where the hostages were supposedly held. They had to clear multiple rooms while identifying and protecting role players acting as humanitarian workers, all while searching for intelligence materials that might be hidden anywhere in the structure. Alpha 6, we have located what appears to be 5 hostages in the main room, reported Petty Officer Stevens. They appear to be uninjured but are obviously traumatized by their experience. Copy that, Alpha 6. Are you able to identify any intelligence materials? Affirmative, Control. We have located what appears to be documents and electronic storage devices in a separate room. Requires technical analysis to determine value. Meanwhile, Team Bravo was dealing with their own challenges as role players acting as hostile reinforcements arrived on the scene. Gunnery Sergeant Parker had to coordinate defensive positions while maintaining communication with Team Alpha and preparing for the extraction phase of the mission. All teams. This is Control, Sarah announced. Be advised that your extraction window is closing. You need to complete your objectives and move to the pickup zone within the next 10 minutes. The time pressure added the final element of realism to the exercise. In real-world operations, extraction windows were often limited by fuel constraints, changing weather conditions, or shifting tactical situations. The teams had to balance thoroughness with speed, making sure they completed their mission without compromising safety. The exercise concluded, with both teams successfully reaching the extraction point with all hostages secured and intelligence materials recovered. But more importantly, they had demonstrated the ability to work together as a joint force under pressure, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining their core values and procedures. During the final after-action review, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and concern as she looked at the operators who would soon be deploying to real-world missions. They had exceeded her expectations in terms of their professionalism, adaptability, and commitment to excellence. "Outstanding performance," she began. "You've demonstrated that joint operations can be more effective than individual unit operations when properly coordinated. You've shown that you can make difficult decisions under pressure while maintaining your ethical and legal obligations." She paused, knowing that this might be the last time she addressed some of these operators. "More importantly, you've shown that you understand the responsibility that comes with the capabilities you've developed. The skills you've learned here are tools for protecting innocent people and preserving freedom, not just weapons for defeating enemies." Chief Kim raised his hand for a final question. "Ma'am, do you have any final advice for us as we prepare for deployment?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "Trust your training, trust your teammates, and trust your judgment. You've prepared well, and you're ready for whatever challenges you might face. But remember that your most important mission is to come home safely so that you can continue serving your country and protecting the people who depend on you." As the session ended and the operators began to disperse, many stopped to thank Sarah personally for the training they had received. The respect in their eyes was genuine, earned through 3 weeks of challenging exercises and professional instruction. Senior Chief Rodriguez was among the last to leave. "Ma'am, I want you to know that this has been some of the best training I've experienced in 20 years of service. These operators are better prepared because of what you've taught them." That evening, Sarah stood alone on the base's main parade ground, looking out at the Pacific Ocean as the sun set behind the horizon. Tomorrow, some of the operators she had trained would begin their journey to unknown dangers in distant places. She had done everything she could to prepare them, but she knew that training could only go so far. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Chief Kim. "Ma'am, thank you for everything. We won't let you down," Sarah typed back. "You've already made me proud. Stay safe and bring everyone home." As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had witnessed over the past 3 weeks. A group of individual operators had become a joint force capable of handling complex missions that neither service could accomplish alone. More importantly, they had become a team that would watch out for each other regardless of which uniform they wore. The next morning, as she watched the departing teams board their transport aircraft, Sarah knew that the bonds forged during their training would endure long after the current mission was complete. The future of military operations would require this kind of joint cooperation, and these operators would be the foundation upon which that future would be built. Commander Harrison joined her on the flight line as the aircraft disappeared into the morning sky. "Think they're ready, Lieutenant Commander?" Sarah watched until the planes were no longer visible before answering. "They're more than ready, sir. They're exactly what our country needs them to be." Standing there in the California morning sun, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction knowing that she had played a role in preparing these warriors for whatever challenges lay ahead. The skeptical looks from that first day had been replaced by mutual respect earned through shared effort and common purpose. In a world where military operations grew increasingly complex, the ability to work together across service boundaries wasn't just an advantage. It was essential for success and survival. The training exercise was complete, but the real test was just beginning.